Hey everybody, and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program RP-0. This first section is going to be our Twitch recap from last week's live stream where we were testing out a new variation on our next generation Mars lander. You can see that we've lengthened the wing sections up top and given them some control surfaces to hopefully help stabilize our descent. Now the very first step was of course to decouple from the decoupler and then dock through the docking ports, because part of this test is a stress runner, just to make sure that the docking ports can handle the forces inherent with the atmospheric drag-related reentry. So we've performed our deorbit burn, and now we're going to get ourselves oriented in with about a 35 to 40 degree pitch up, and hopefully we can maneuver so that those cargo bays are side to side. Again, the weight distribution between them is unequal. We're probably about a half ton to a ton heavier on, I guess, what would be the cargo bay at the bottom of your screen, which to me is the right hand cargo bay. I could be wrong. Now that I'm looking at it more and I see where the hatch is, that would be the left-hand cargo bay, and that should be the one that's heavier. So we do expect to incur a little bit of roll across the descent, but hopefully these thruster ports and all of their related torque will be enough to manage it. Going into Smart ASS makes crazy things. So I did try to use it a little bit, but honestly, I wanted this to be able to just use the stock SAS system for stability, and was really hoping that it would be as aerodynamically neutral as possible, other than just a little bit of effort needed to keep it at the angle of attack we would like to see to actually generate enough lift to give us the time to slow down. Although both stock SAS and Mech Jeb do tend to overcompensate a little bit in physical warp while moving through the atmosphere. And really, this was just a time-saving maneuver on my part. When doing this not in physics warp, it actually behaves very predictably. It just takes like half an hour to actually perform a landing, which was, we had other stuff to get to during this live stream, so I do expect to be using physics warp really all the time when landing these things. It just really, there's not much to pay attention to or do until you get down to about the 30 or 40 kilometer range, which is where things start to go just a little weird with really every iteration of this lander. Now, other market improvements on this generation, other than the improvements made to the basket for aero stability, we now have just changed out the nose cones on the on two sides of the ascent stage, so that we can actually see the door. It's not like anyone will be coming or going through that door, but it does make transferring the crew into the little side panels for entry and exit of the vehicle a whole lot easier. I don't have to clip the camera inside the nose cone and try to clip the door while angles are being weird. It's just it doesn't look quite as good, but functionally it's much better. And we were able to tuck a little bit of fuel in there, so it does improve things overall, although we did have to limit the fuel in there because it's rather high up in the basket, and so if we were to really maximize our utilization on those tanks, it would generate some instability. But we're getting into atmosphere actual now, coming down to about the 45 some odd kilometer mark in altitude actual, and we're starting to see some real drag pickup here. Now, it's strange to me that the wing surfaces on the top of the spacecraft are not really generating lift, although the ones on the bottom of the spacecraft seem to be doing pretty well, although it is pushing us lower into the atmosphere. Now we're starting to get some figures on those top panels, but still not as much as I would have expected, although our vertical speed, our sync rate, is actually looking pretty impressive here. We are about to top off our pickup over 100, but considering our speed and altitude, that's still doing better than most of our iterations have done. And with the excellent torque provided by these thrusters, now we're starting to see that roll instability due to our weight imbalance. But we are able to maintain about 45 degrees, which really, really slows down our sink rate by a whole lot. You can just kind of watch how slowly that number is picking up as we are maintaining this angle of attack through our descent, coming down into now the 20 kilometer range. We're about 10 kilometers off from our first drogue chute deploy and our engine ignition. To really, that burn is just to keep the stress off the frame while the parachutes deploy. After the parachutes are fully open, then we'll go into our terminal descent phase, where we have a prolonged engine burn for a soft touchdown. But those aerodynamic spikes are really, really looking pretty good. If we maintain a 45-degree angle, there's our engine is lit. It was lit a little while ago. I missed my cue. And our drogue chute deploys, all 4 have been successful, coming into about the 6 kilometer range. There's the opening and our primary deploy, just a little flexing on the frame of the basket, but much less severe than before. So engine will be shut down, landing gear will be extended, and we'll go ahead and just coast on down through a nice, I guess, dusty Martian morning onto some really relatively flat terrain here at Mars Midlands, but a little bit of a coast phase. We'll use physics warp to speed through some of that as we hold our angle and get ready for final landing and touchdown. And for all of that stuff, well, I'm just going to turn you on over to old me live during the broadcast. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get this thing on the dirt. Yes, I did try to put a longer deploy duration on the parachutes for that exact reason, Wook. Alright. 300 meters. Let's rolling throttle up. Windows, if you even sticky key me, I'm going to shoot you in the face. 200 meters. $100 meters. And botching it. Come on. 0.6 meters per... We are hovering at 12 meters. Throttle down, dude. Come on. Come on. So much fuel. But hey, we can hover. That's a pretty cool shot. 10 meters. 9. Touching down. Hooah. That was dumb. Hey, we did it. So with one more explosion-free touchdown in the books, we will actually take the time to transfer over our Ascent stage fuel into the primary tanks. Now, we actually have launched in previous episodes without refueling, although I think we used a bit more fuel this run than last. But this fuel is basically to make sure that we have enough Delta V to make it to orbit and rendezvous with Harmonia Station. We keep it in these extra tanks to, well, 1 for ballast and control during descent, and 2 because we're using a lot of thruster fuel on the way down, and it's all sourced from the Ascent stage. So it's best to keep some extra fuel in the basket just to make sure that we can have enough to, make our way up. So we'll just test out our deployment of things. There is our nice rover, all nice and tucked in to transport the crew to whatever surface installation we have available that deploys cleanly without bursting any tires. Now, we do have the storage container on the other side, but we're just going to undock and go for it. So this is just a quick Ascent test to really kind of see how much DV we're looking at for making our way back to orbit, and relying a whole lot on that absolutely excessive thrust to weight ratio provided by our ELE main engine. Now, the runtime on that engine is limited to about 8 minutes, so I'm sure I've mentioned it before that the plan is to swap the engine in orbit after a successful launch and ascent, so that every descent with a new basket is being carried out by a fresh engine. That's the plan. We'll see exactly how well it works. It's a methodology I've never actually used before or tested, so it'll be interesting to see how a lot of this plays out. But we've reached our target apoapsis of above 250 kilometers, and we still have quite a bit of fuel left in the tank, even though we launched from not quite full. So there'll be a very brief circularization burn. Angle that nose down, yeah, 469 by 234. It's in orbit, but we still have 1400 before we unlock our reserve docking fuel, bringing us up to more than 2 kilometers per second. So I'm very happy to call this probably a finished prototype. We're going to start boxing it up, and hopefully we'll get one to Mars for an uncrewed test run sometime this Mars window, although it's going to be very, very tricky. Speaking of going things to Mars, it is our Mars window. So we need to start shipping things to Mars. We're like 4 days away from the actual Mars window, and probably 20 days away from the most optimal Mars transfer point, which I had hoped to launch a BPR topped off with a Chestnut M to bring our next batch of crew into Mars orbit. So yeah, that's a thing that we're going to try to do. We're going to get the crew on station whether or not the lander is ready for them this run or not. I do intend on keeping them on station for the next 5 years, so we will have at least another opportunity to get the test lander to them. It just means we'll probably have to launch a test basket, or a spare basket, and a spare engine, this window instead of next window, as the original plan called for. So this is a fuel resupply pod for said Chestnut, carrying kerosene and liquid oxygen on its way to Harmonia Station. I always like to launch the resupply fuel pods first, because if they don't work, or if the Kerbal alarm clock or Mech Jeb has lied to me about the Delta V necessary to make this transfer window, we don't have a crew stranded somewhere. We've just lost a couple $100,000 on a useless launcher, but it's honestly not a big deal. We just missed booster sep and fairing sep, and all other things on this launch are going extraordinarily well. We're actually on a very clean flight path, and kind of walking our time to apogee with our runtime at a very solid rate. This might be one of the best launches I've done in quite a long time. Now, because we're throwing things at Mars and not Venus, we will be doing more aero capture than propulsive capture, at least for all of our resupply pods. I don't think we actually have a resupply pod that propulsively captures anywhere, to be real honest, but honestly, things are a little bit easier to do at Mars, because if you go too low, you might hit a mountain, but you won't just randomly overheat and explode, which is a lot easier to deal with. And there is circularization 267 by 207. We will separate from the core stage and deploy our solar panels and activate all of our radiators to try to keep as much of that liquid oxygen inside as possible. And then we can clear our target from the moon, set it for Mars, and then let Mech Jeb do all the math. And yeah, 3.754 kilometers per second to transfer to Mars, which, considering how out of the window we are right now, that is actually really, really, really cheap. And over the next 15 days or so, 20 days, it's only going to get just marginally cheaper, which is absolutely fantastic. this is actually a really, really, really good Mars window. So I'm going to try to capitalize on this as much as I can. And although this does mean putting off the Titan glider mission for at least another month, I think it's worth it considering the amount of cargo we can hurl at Mars for the absolutely bargain basement price of less than 4 kilometers per second. So we'll go ahead and get ourselves lined up with the node, get within about 5 minutes of it. Our HG3 is primed and ready. You see the gimbal doing its gimbally things, and then a successful light of our B upper stage. That after about 9 or so minutes of runtime, hopefully we will be quickly on our way to Mars, and then we can start cycling through a lot of launches. Because oh boy, I'm glad we have 2 launch pads, because we can, we time it out right. We can do a launch about every 3 days or so, which not ideal. I should have another launch pad, but we're broke, and so my plans for a 3rd launch pad had to be pushed off indefinitely until we can really, after this Mars window and after our Titan glider mission, we'll get our crewed orbital program back up and running. We'll do some shuttle flights and try to find a purpose for them. I'm sure there's something we can do. We could do shuttle launch somethings somewhere and try to generate some cash flow for the space program, which is something we absolutely need. Contracts are kind of sparse at this late stage in the game. So there's a brief and unintentional encounter with the moon, but we'll just burn right past that and then try to walk down this last 300 or so meters per second. We'll come up on a throttle back point here in just a minute or two, and then shut down our main engine about 5.7 meters per second shy of what we wanted. But, these things happen, so we will go ahead and set ourselves a new node and then try to dial it in to where we can actually get an encounter with Mars, because currently we're just not going to get it. And there it is. It does require a lot of tuning if we want to actually encounter Mars in a way that's in any way, shape, or form useful to us. Like I said, Aero capture is the order of the day. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of fuel left in this B upper stage that we can prime that Aero capture maneuver with a bit of a burn. But we would like to come in and have as little relative inclination with Harmonia Station as possible, and which means being on the opposite end of the planet from where it wants us to be currently. We're just going to try to walk this in a little bit, although KSP obviously not cooperating. But 322 meters per second is particularly not good. But here's old me with new problems. So, you could, well, we'll fudge it. We'll get within a little after a minute or here. We need to be somewhat accurate on this node. We need KSP not to crash, please, please. Or are we just no connection? Oh, you've got to be fucking kidding me. Oh, that's awesome. Hooray! We need to be accurate. We don't have any batteries. I hit the wrong button a few times. Yeah, here we go again. I'll say, I know I booted those antennas. I know I did. 6 minutes out. At least we have some kind of power. All right, and are we looking? Are you kidding me? Not enough electric charge to fire the igniters on the HG3. Figures, right? Mm-hmm. How about now? Sucker. No? Nothing doing, huh? Alright. it thinks that we don't have any electric charge forever and in perpetuity. So it's going to take an F5 and an F9 to reset this little situation we have here, and unfortunately I am out of time. Yeah, it's just mean. KSP, why do you do this to me? Fortunately, after the live stream, I would find some time to come back to this, although it would take a little bit of retooling on the node after we got a little further in our orbital path. I mean, the node we plotted was, we passed it a long time ago, so in the interest of accuracy, I would just go ahead and plot a new node, and would you look at that, it came out to only be about 189 meters per second, and for some reason, it thought that our main engine was not activated anymore. So after activating it and making sure that we had our solar panels into the sun, we'd go ahead and burn through that almost 190 meters per second, shutting our engine down just a little shy, and then correcting a bit on RCS for what I would call a very, very solid approach vector. We're like 2 degrees off from Harmonia Station on arrival, and in pretty good shape. So moving on to our next launch, this is a life support resupply pod, also bound for Harmonia Station, because we're going to do just 10,000 of these launches for this window and get as much heavy things thrown up there as we can. So we're just going to speed through a bunch of this launch footage. The same DN6 as before, same B upper stage as before, just a slightly different fairing, and obviously different cargo. So I tried very, very hard to emulate as much of that previous launch profile as I possibly could, and I think it actually turned out pretty well. I've written down, finally, I know I've only been flying this vehicle for like 2 years, but I've finally written down some checkpoints as far as what to look for in Ascent profile. And although we are outside of our prograde vector for quite a bit of this, we still came out gangbusters as far as what we were able to put into orbit. There's our booster set, fairing set, me compensating for a lack of relative inclination. We'll go ahead and boot up our comms and get everything angled in to make sure that we maintain communications with the spacecraft upon arrival. Hopefully we'll be able to do it with direct control from either Chestnut or Harmonia Station, depending on how soon the crew gets there, which I think we've already decided they're absolutely going to launch this window. There's no being deterred, despite the fact that no one is qualified to do so, because our moon program is currently on hiatus. So there was separation of the core stage and booting of the B upper stage. We'll let Mech Jeb plot our values for us, and 3.722 meters per second on this transfer burn, which is, just a little bit less than our last launch, which, hey, cool, I'll take it. A solid light from the HG3 upper stage, and we'll start making our way to Mars. The use of a little bit of physics warp, because I'm always short for time. And I need to make a note for myself to upgrade the thrusters on this life support pod. These little guys, even though they're huge, just don't have the torque to maneuver this absolutely massive container of sandwiches and Kool-Aid as far as into a docking alignment. The docking takes forever. And just like last time, we do not have a Mars encounter off the bat, so we will plot our correction node and then tug at our node wheel for absolutely ever, and try to wiggle this into what looks like an intercept. But again, just like last time, we have to get it on the correct side of the planet. But we are able to figure something out. 447 meters per second. Certainly less than ideal, but we've got the delta V to make up for it. We're just going to make sure that we roll to keep those solar panels into the wind, and even if we show up with 1 kilometer per second in the tanks, we could still probably burn through 500 meters per second before we hit our aero capture point, which is of great advantage to us. So after a little bit of touching up on thrusters, we won't quite get the angle we need. I did try really, really, really hard to wiggle that thing down to the 2 degrees I was promised by Mech Jeb, but it's just not going to be there. But we're still going to Mars. And that's going to do it for this episode, everyone. Thank you so much for hanging out. I really do appreciate it, and I will see all of you in the next one. So until then, see you later.